Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus, and we're doing this chronologically by following the Gospels. That's where we're sticking with right now. Looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we're doing this in chronological order. Kind of get a better idea, a better feel for the story of Jesus as it played out. And today we are looking at Jesus sending out the 12 apostles. And so this happens in Matthew 10, Mark 6, and Luke 9. I'm going to stick with Matthew's account. It's kind of the longer one, goes into a little bit more detail. I'm going to mention some things about Mark that's a little bit different than Matthew and Luke's account. And so some of the things that we'll look at here. But it starts out with Jesus calling the disciples together, and he gives them the authority to cast out evil spirits, to heal every kind of disease and illness. And so this is the first time we see him giving them to the ability or the authority to be able to do this. And then it lists in Matthew, it lists all the 12. And it says in verse 5 that he sends them out with his instructions. And he says, don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, right? But only go to the people of Israel, God's lost sheep. That's who he sends them to. And we're going to talk about why here in a second. And he says, go and announce that the kingdom of heaven is near, right? And then he tells them to heal the sick, to raise the dead, cure those with leprosy, cast out demons, and give as freely as they have received. So, as much as God has given to them, make sure you give back to other people. He instructs them not to take any money, right, in your money belts. No gold, silver, even copper coins. Basically, they went out without anything. He said, don't carry a traveler's bag with even with a change of clothes, right, and sandals, or even a walking stick. He said, don't hesitate to accept hospitality because those who work deserve to be fed. And we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper as well. He says, whenever you enter a city or village, search for a worthy person and stay at their home until you leave the town. When you enter the home, give it a blessing. If it turns out to be a worthy home, let your blessing stand. If not, take the blessing back. If any household or town refuses to welcome you or listen to you, shake the dirt off your feet as you leave. And he says, I tell you the truth. The wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah will be better off than such a town on Judgment Day. And this is a important thing that he's comparing them to. There was he's saying, look, if a town doesn't accept me, shake the dust, the dirt off your sandals, and that town will be worse off than Sodom and Gomorrah was. And if you understand the reference there with the Old Testament and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, God completely destroyed them, right, with fire and brimstone, completely destroyed both towns because of how sinful and wicked they are. So that's the image that God's given there. And so we see in the start of this that Jesus sends out, he calls the 12, he sends them out, right? He didn't draft them, he didn't force them, he didn't ask them to volunteer. He chose them, right? These were, some of them were his followers, some of them had followed him for a while, kind of went back to what they're doing and then started following him again. We've seen that as we've gone through this study. But he chose these 12 to serve him in a special way. And so and Christ calls us the same way today. Now, we don't have the ability to go out and heal and do all those type of things. The miraculous miracles there doesn't mean we can't pray, lay our hands on people, pray, and do those type of things. We don't have the miraculous ability to raise people from the dead, those kind of things. But he doesn't twist our arms. He calls us, but he doesn't twist our arms. He doesn't make us do something we don't want to do. It's our choice, right? We're called to do this. We're called to spread his message. It's up to us whether we're going to join him or remain behind, right? And so we need to make sure that we understand that we are called to do what the apostles here did, right? What he sent them out to do, and that's to spread the word of the kingdom, the message of Jesus, to spread it to everyone. And so he tells them, right, go out, but I don't want you to go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. And so why didn't he want them to do that? Well, we know who a Gentile is, right? It was anyone that wasn't Jew. The Samaritans were the half breeds. We talked about that with the woman at the well. It was someone who was mixed between a Jew and a Gentile. And Jesus asked them to go only to the Jews because he came, you see this in Romans 1:16, he came to the Jews first. And then it was going to be the Jews' responsibility to spread the message to the rest of the world. So he came to the Jews first, and then it was up to them to spread his message. And so, that's why he wanted them to do that. And then he gives them instructions about what to carry. Now, Mark records that the disciples were instructed to take nothing with them except walking sticks. Matthew and Luke say take something with you and not take walking sticks. Now, it could have been there's a couple of things here, and again, it's not a big thing, right? I mean, even if Matthew and Luke wrote something completely different than Mark, it doesn't take away from the credibility of the Bible. It just means maybe they remembered it. I don't know. We'll see, but it could have been that that Luke was actually talking about a walking stick, an actual walking stick, whereas in Matthew and Mark's account, the translation there would have been like a club, like some kind of club for protection. And so that could have been it. It could have, there's a couple things, but you know, again, in the end, even if these don't match, it doesn't take away from the credibility of the Bible. I don't think so. It's a small detail, and so I think we like sometimes for things to line up completely. And again, it could be a translation issue. So, I mean, it doesn't take away from the credibility of the story that we're looking at and the things in the Bible, right? In any case, right? The point in all this, the point in all three accounts is the disciples were to leave at once without extensive prep. They weren't to spend a ton of time preparing, and they were to trust in God to take care of them as they went out. And I think this is something that's relevant for us today, especially I think those who are going into the ministry. A lot of times we're like, well, I've got to be prepared. I've got to make this much. I've got to be here. It's like, no, go out, let God take care of you. God's going to take care of you, right? Or God's people should take care of you. We're going to see that in a minute. And so yeah, I think that's what the kind of the call here is he's like, look, don't take all these things with you. Don't take a ton of stuff with you. Take what you got on, go. Don't take any extra money. Don't take it, just go and you'll be taken care of. Spread my message. And so it's an interesting take that we see here of how he calls them. One of the things they were called to do is only stay in one home in each town because they didn't want to offend their host, right? Because you could see where human nature might kick in and you go and you stay in someone's home, and then as you're ministering to this town, well, maybe someone nicer comes along and says, hey, why don't you come stay at my nice place, you know and it's like, no, you don't do that. You go where you stay, or you go and stay there and don't move around. I mean, that would be very insulting to the people that you were with, and so you don't want to offend anyone, especially in that day. I mean there are a lot of customs, a lot of things that you would do, and it would be very insulting to move from one person's home to another home while you're in the middle of the town like that. And so um, he gave them a principle here that they were to give as freely as they had received. God had given them a lot. Jesus had given them a lot, and so he was like, give as freely as you receive. Give, right? Because God has showered us with blessings. We should generously be generously generous to others. I'm sorry, of our time, love, and our possessions, right? We're called, this is what we're called to be. As much as God has given us, which, anyone, especially if you live in America, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to downplay someone who's poor in America, but literally the poorest people in America are richer than some of the richer people in other countries, right? And so we have to look at that from that perspective, is how blessed we are, right? And so we need to make sure as Christians that we are giving back to others as much as we are blessed by God. Sometimes people will take that and it's like, you need, and this is a personal thing, right? Is that, well, you need to make sure you give all that blessings to the church. And I do think there's credibility to, and we'll cover this eventually, giving to the church, right? I do think that there is credibility there. But I think a lot of it, a lot more of what we have should be given to other people to help other people, not just here, let me give this to the church to take care of helping other people. We need to be taking care of other people ourselves, not just the church, or the church with a certain name doing that. It should be coming from Christians. Christian people should be taking care of other people, Christians and non-Christians alike. And so then he says those who minister should be taken care for, right? Right? And the disciples could expect food and shelter in return for the spiritual service that they were providing. They were going into these towns. They were doing, taking care of those people, or I'm sorry, ministering to those people. And so those people should be taking care of them. And so the question then is who ministers to you? Who's ministering to you, right? And are you making sure they're taken care of, right? As a preacher's kid growing up, I saw my parents struggle and sometimes when they didn't have to, right? Um, now when they were first starting out, they were starting a new church in a good sized town, right? It was small. They were, up and coming. They didn't have a ton of money. They were being supported by another church. But there seems to be this idea in the church, and I do feel like this is going away some. Um, but I still see it that, you know, well, we don't need to pay the preacher too much, right? Because we either want to keep him humble, or I've heard a lot of different reasons as to why. It's like, well, I've heard some elders and some deacons say, well, I didn't ever make that much, so why should the preacher ever make that much? And yeah, some of them I want to be like, look, trust me, you never worked as hard as these preachers in your day in your life, but it's a very hard job, right? And you can't compare. The other thing I've seen is compare. Well, most I ever made was $30,000 or $40,000 in a year. There's no reason for it. Well, $30,000 in the 1980s is now $130,000 a year. Well, are you willing to pay a preacher that? Right? And that's the kind of thing that we need to look at now. I also come from the side of this is, as you know of us, is the way we've tried to establish the way we do our churches. We try not to have any salaries. We try not to have a lot of overhead cost. And so, like personally, me as I minister, I'm able to take care of myself, right? And so I don't need, a lot of people, you know, I don't need that help. But if I did, I would hope that the people that I minister to and help would help take care of me. And so I think that's the scenarios we need to look at. But the unfortunate fact that we have right now is there's a lot of ministers, a lot of people who are ministering who are having to take second jobs because they're not being taken care of. And now I understand that there's some places that just can't, no matter what they do, they just can't. But there's some that could, right? And and I think that we need to make sure that one of the things as a church, if we're going to pay preachers, if we're going to pay staff, is that we pay them a good wage, right? What they're worth, and not just what we think. Well, we need to keep them humble. That's I'm not saying we pay preachers millions of dollars, right? I'm saying we look at what it costs to live nowadays, and we make sure that we are paying them enough to where they don't have to suffer or go out and get a second job in order to be able to continue to work. And so again, that's a kind of a personal one for mine, just because I grew up with that and saw that a lot. But we need to make sure that we are taken care of, or that the people are ministering to us are taken care of. We need to ensure that. All right. And so, why did Jesus tell his disciples, the apostles here, to shake the dust off their feet if a city or town didn't welcome them? Now, this actually goes back from Jewish tradition, because when they would leave, when Jews would leave a Gentile city, they would shake the dust off their feet as an insult, right, or as a separation from the Gentiles, showing that they're better. Kind of, it was a pious type attitude of, look, I'm better than you. I'm actually shaking the dirt from your town off my feet so I don't take it with me. And so Jesus tells them to do the same thing to the Jewish towns if they don't accept him. Again, that same insult, basically saying, look, you're not worthy. And then he goes on to say, look, you know, man, they're going to be worse off than Sodom and Gomorrah was if we don't do this. And so the gesture there was to show people that they were making a wrong choice, and that their opportunity to choose Jesus might not present itself again. It was kind of a warning and a taking a control cultural thing that they did and pushing it back on them. So again, verses 1 through 15 of Matthew, and that's where I'm kind of going through. It kind of covers everything that's in Mark and Luke here as well. Is the fact that Jesus has sent us out. Now, he sent us all out in different ways. We all have different gifts. Some of us are going to be able to minister better than others, but we're all called to go out and spread the message of Christ. Now, it doesn't have to be in the form of preaching or teaching. It could be in the form of just being a kind, loving friend to someone, and talking to that person about Jesus eventually, and working to convert them to Christ. For others, it may be someone like me who ministers, and teaches and goes out more. But it's all going to look different. But the call is, right, is that we are all to reach out. We're all to spread the message of Christ. We're all to do that. And again, we all have our different gifts. We all have our different roles. But in that, we see in the story that we're to trust God. We're to trust God in it when we do this, and we're to rely on Him and not to try to rely on ourselves for everything. But even in that, too, we're to take care of one another, right? If you have someone ministering to you and they're not being taken care of, take care of them. Find a way to make sure they're taken care of. and we need to do that kind of stuff. And again, then if someone, and then that last part of that message, if someone doesn't accept the message of Jesus, right, we're not to totally dismiss them. It's not a I'm never going to talk to you about Jesus again, but there does come a time where there comes a time where we need to kind of dust or brush the dust or shake the dust off our sandals and move on, right? Because I've seen people who have just they've they would focus just on one person, and no matter what they did, that person wasn't going to come to Christ, and they miss opportunities with other people. It doesn't mean we don't continue to pray for this person over here or continue to work on this person, but we just don't focus on them 100%, right? And let them take up all of our energy, let them take up all of our ministry and time, and that we use that on and other people that we see as well. And so again, I think this is a good message. There's a lot here. I mean, I could go on even longer on a lot of these points and dive deeper into them a little bit, but the overall message here is that Jesus has sent us out, and we need to make sure that we are spreading the message of God in accordance with whatever your gifting or whatever your talents are. But please, you need to be talking to people about Christ and trying to win people over to Christ. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching these videos. If you find them useful, please share them with someone that you think would be beneficial to. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do that. We're going to continue to publish and put out recordings and messages and studies as we go through. And as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.